Thank you so much, Lori, for reading the scripture for us this morning. Anybody who has to stand up and read names like that, I just appreciate so much. Thank you. When Pastor Charlie asked if I would bring the message for Laity Sunday, I made a rookie mistake. I agreed. Without first asking what the topic would be. So technically 2 mistakes. If I had known he would have me preach on Saint Teresa and service, I might have reconsidered. No pressure, no pressure. Let's learn a little bit about Mother Teresa. She was born Agnes Gonca Bojau. Did I mess up that Albanian? Very likely. But she was born in 1910 in northern Macedonia, which at the time was part of the Ottoman Empire. She was raised in a devoutly Catholic family, and at the age of 18, she moved to Ireland to join the Sisters of Loreto. In 1929, she moved to India, where she began teaching and eventually served as a headmistress. After nearly 20 years of service as a teacher, she experienced a call within a call. She began missionary work with the poor in 1948 and spent several months at Patna to receive basic medical training at Holy Family Hospital. Now, she founded a school in Calcutta, and before she began tending to the poor and hungry. Eventually, she established the Missionaries of Charity, a global network of sisters and volunteers who work in hospitals, in homes for the dying, in orphanages, and soup kitchens. At the time of her death in 1997, the Missionaries of Charity had over 4,000 sisters and an associated brotherhood of 300 members operating 610 missions in 123 countries. These included hospices and homes for people with HIV and AIDS, leprosy and tuberculosis, soup kitchens, children's and family counseling programs, orphanages, and schools. The Missionaries of Charity were aided by co-workers numbering over 1 million in the 1990s. Mother Teresa's theology was not abstract. It was incarnational. She insisted that the face of Christ appears in the distressing disguise of the poor. She did not deny the complexity of poverty or claim that she could fix structural injustice single-handedly. Instead, she insisted on the dignity of persons through small acts: clean water, a bowl of broth, a comb through tangled hair, a whispered prayer. Those acts did not solve every problem, but they reclaimed humanity for those the world had tossed aside. Now, it's important to recognize that when she walked out of that convent, she left security. She walked into Calcutta's slums with one simple aim. It was to be with those whom society had forgotten. She began by washing wounds, feeding the hungry, and holding the hands of the dying. The most famous line attributed to her is a simple claim about vocation and scope. Not all of us can do great things, but every one of us can do small things with great love. Her life teaches that fidelity in the small places becomes a presence that points to God's larger work. Acts 6 gives us a snapshot of a growing church confronted by a very ordinary, very human problem. You heard Laurie read about this. Some widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. Now, the apostles recognized the 2 truths at once. First, the care for practical needs matters deeply. It does not matter how much of the good news you share with someone if they are worried about where their next meal will come from or where they will find safe shelter. Anyone who has ever worked in a classroom knows that if a child is hungry, the child is not learning. Second, the apostles also recognized the shape of their particular vocation, prayer and the ministry of the word. Now, their solution is both deeply theological and profoundly communal, and I would also say practical. They call the community together and appoint 7 lay people, full of spirit and wisdom, to tend to that work so that the whole body may flourish and the word will continue to spread. This passage is a blueprint for shared ministry. Ministry is not the monopoly of the clergy. Sorry, Charlie. I know. It is actually the call of every person. In United Methodist theology, that conviction is sacramental. Baptism incorporates us into Christ's body and issues a commissioning to love God, to resist injustice, and to serve as Christ's hands and feet in the world. The Book of Discipline, our baptismal vows, and even John Wesley's practice of class and band leaders all reiterate that the church's help depends on the faithful service of people who may never preach a sermon, but who sustain the life of the community. Now, if you're like me, you may be thinking, okay, sure, yeah, the apostles did it, Mother Teresa did it, but they were literal saints. Literal saints. What does that have to do with today, with me? This is my friend Helen Ride. Born in England and trained in education and religious studies, Helen migrated to the U.S. and devoted their life to teaching, advocacy, and bridge building. As a United Methodist home missioner and as a staff member with Reconciling Ministries, Helen worked for inclusion of people who were often pushed to the margins of church life, particularly LGBTQ plus people. Helen's gifts were not flash or fame. They were listening. They were patience and courage and the capacity to hold the complex conversations without abandoning compassion. Now, I was fortunate to know and love Helen, to work with him on many justice and advocacy issues in the church and beyond. Much of the good work of the 2020 and 2024 General Conference can be attributed to Helen. Helen's work reminds us that service also takes the shape of advocacy. Acts of service are not limited to the physical needs. They can be standing up for someone's right to belong, creating space for those whom tradition or fear has excluded. Helen lived Wesleyan grace, insisting that God's redeeming love is wide and deep enough for everyone. And they did the daily labor of helping institutions and hearts breathe that generosity into practice. Okay, that's one person that you may or may not have known. But what about someone that you actually know? How about Rosa Jones? Rosa's ministry was local and deeply formative. Born in Coleman, Alabama, Rosa distinguished herself academically and chose education as her vocation. As a math and science teacher in Nassau County, she shaped minds and grew confidence in young people, including me. She combined that professional calling with her faith, serving in various leadership roles, including United Women in Faith. Rosa used her gifts to champion things like reading programs and supporting food drives through mission involvement. She lived a theology of formation, education, and friendship as a means of grace. Rosa modeled a conviction that faith forms habits. Faith forms habits. In her high school valedictorian speech, yes, she was a valedictorian, she said that sympathy and true friendliness could resolve many troubles through everyday neighborliness. That sounds like Rosa. Though Rosa has passed on from this earthly life, her legacy of learning and love lives on. It's actually right here. It's actually right behind us in the newly named Rosa's Reading Corner. It is the UWF library located right behind us next to the elevator. If you have not seen it, I do recommend stopping by. What about Chris Bryan? Chris's story is a portrait of incarnational service that spans institutions. Schoolrooms, businesses, healthcare boards, civic foundations, and the life of the church. A Fernandina Beach native and the University of Florida graduate, I will only say this for Chris, go Gators. Chris taught, worked in family businesses, raised a family, and then poured her energy into community organizations. The YMCA, hospital boards, school foundations, and numerous church ministry. She chaired boards, she supported capital campaigns, and she took on the often unseen labor of stewardship and care. Many of the beautiful updates of the recent years, right here in this sanctuary, were made possible because of Chris's vision. Chris's life shows how ministry is not simply the tasks done on a Sunday morning. It's the intentional, faithful integration of vocation and discipleship. When leaders show up for schools and hospitals and local ministries, they create systems of care that outlast a single sermon. Chris taught us that faithful leadership in institutions can be an extended form of pastoral ministry. It protects the vulnerable. It equips the young. It nurtures structures that enable small acts of neighborly love to flourish. Mother Teresa, Helen Rye, Rosa Jones, Chris Bryan. These lives are different in scope and context, but together they teach the same lesson. Faithful presence and humble acts of service advance God's kingdom. You might be thinking, okay, yeah, well, they all did good work. But Jessica, have you read the news lately? We live in a time when it's global crises and local suffering, and it makes me feel small and helpless. That vulnerability can paralyze us, or make us deeply faithful to the small acts God calls us to. Acts 6 shows that doing the small things with that great love changes churches, it changes neighborhoods, and it changes entire communities. So why do small acts matter so much? Well, first, they embody presence. Theologically, presence signals incarnational theology. Big words, God with us. That's what that is. And it's made visible through the human touch. That's a meal offered. That's a hand held. That's a hallway conversation. That's the removal of a barrier to a classroom. These acts are God's love in actionable, tangible ways. Second, small acts create trust. If a family receives regular groceries, they begin to believe that someone cares. If a neighbor's lawn is mowed after surgery, they feel dignity restored. Trust opens doors for deeper conversation, pastoral care, and long-term transformation. That is how small things amplify into larger spiritual and social change. Third, small acts are replicable. The apostles' solution in Acts 6, it wasn't a centralized, unsustainable program. It was a distributed model. Rather than naming one person to carry the weight of service, they asked 7 lay leaders from the community, and they invited others to share the load. That distributive quality, that scales. Many small, faithful acts multiply. Finally, small acts can confront systemic wrongs by humanizing them. A single child taught to read experiences personal transformation. A veteran receiving respectful care is less likely to fall into cycles of isolation that social structures, they exacerbate them. Systemic change begins when a critical mass of persons live differently. When love showing up becomes contagious. Now, this is not to say that those small acts excuse us from seeking structural justice. Not at all. Mother Teresa and Helen Wright both remind us that the presence and advocacy belong together. We care for the immediate needs, and we work to change the conditions that create those needs. The church in Acts 6 thrived because people answered a simple call. Notice a need. Bring people together. Appoint wise servants. Get to work. Mother Teresa taught us to meet the face of Christ in the poor and to perform humble acts of dignity. Helen Wright taught us to open the doors of belonging and to stand with those who have been overlooked. Rosa Jones taught us that education and friendship are acts of discipleship. Chris Bryan taught us that faithful leadership across institutions sustains the common good. So now what? I have good news. There are so many opportunities for service, the big kind and the small kind. You've already heard about some of it. So just behind the Parton Center, there is a lovely cupboard. You may have seen this. It looks a lot like our front doors. This is the Bob Powell Food Pantry. This small pantry provides easy access to much needed food and hygiene products that many simply cannot afford or just don't have access to. Adding a package of tuna or a box of fruit cups is a tangible act of care for your neighbor. Did you know that our missions committee, which our own deaconess, Lucinda Louts, oversees, sponsors a hands-on mission each month? You've heard about the one that's happening tomorrow over at America's Youth. We're actually going to partner with other community groups like Keep Nassau Beautiful and Conserve Nassau to clean up and rejuvenate the property and the gardens. The volunteers and students of this organization are our neighbors. Perhaps hospitality is more your speed. Lean into that. That's a ministry of welcome. You can volunteer with Gracie's Kitchen or Interfaith Dinner Network. You can prepare and serve meals to those in need. The Ark Nassau, Hope House, Yulee Primary School, Kenya Partners, Porch St. Solomon, Kairos Prison Ministry, Corps, Residing Hope, Barnabas, and Mobility Worldwide, also known as PET to us. These are all familiar. And none of these organizations require sainthood to show up and help. They are where people with busy schedules and willing hearts make an extraordinary difference. The gospel is not an assignment to fix the whole world at once. It is a call to faithful presence. It is the vocation to do the small things that accomplish more than we can count. Because not all of us can do great things, but every one of us can do small things with great love. Thanks be to God.